You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Mansell.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we are, of course, your hosts for this show. And this is the first time in many, many weeks, and it might be the last time in a few weeks, I don't know yet, where we're not reviewing something. So this time we're actually talking about some news finally, because as you know, there's just been a ton of stuff that's been happening in the Star Wars universe. I mean, we did do that one show a couple of weeks ago where we talked about all the stuff they announced at Star Wars Celebration. And so what that did was that allowed us to get some of the news out of the way. You know, I don't really want to put it like that, but I mean, it was nice because they actually dealt with a big chunk of it, right? A lot of the rumors that have been going around and all this other stuff. But one of the things that was brought up at Celebration, and there has been another interview, was it with just Dave Filoni or was it with Filoni and Favreau?
Today's topic?
Yeah.
Oh, Filoni and Favreau.
It was Filoni and Favreau. Okay, so they were talking about basically building the whole Mandalorian universe out with this movie they want to come out with and all this crossover stuff. So I guess now would probably be a good time, you know, if you wanted to do it, maybe fill us in on everything that's pretty much going on with this thing.
Yeah, so okay, everyone, we're kind of building the Mandoverse, as we've kind of dubbed it. And a lot of people are kind of calling it the Mandalorian universe. This is, of course, the events that happen post the Jedi pre sequel trilogy. So we're in that 30-year gap. And there's a lot of shows that are kind of currently on Disney Plus and more to come. Currently, we have 3 seasons now complete of The Mandalorian. We have an upcoming season of Ahsoka that's supposed to debut in August, just in time for Eric's birthday. And we also have the Book of Boba Fett that's had 1 season so far. So, as we've seen, if you guys are following on Disney Plus with these shows, so far we've seen a crossover. We've seen, we've seen the Boba Fett in the Mandalorian, and we've also seen the Mandalorian in the Book of Boba Fett. So this is cool because things are kind of taking place within the same timeline, same space. We're seeing, Mando kind of help Boba as he's kind of trying to take over Jabba's palace and reestablish himself kind of as I don't know if you want to call him a crime lord, because he seems a little bit more honorable than that, but he's kind of like a, I guess almost like a governor of some sort of Tatooine.
Yeah, it's funny because Boba Fett's role in that whole thing really somewhat mirrors Grief Karga in season 3 of The Mandalorian. There's a really big similarity to how they both handle, their respective territories. And in addition to that, I find it interesting, too, that both of them were sort of on the other side of the law, right? And now they're trying to almost go legit and be legitimate governors or rulers, or however you want to put it. And I couldn't help but the whole time, watching season 3 of The Mandalorian, I just could not help but see the similarities and everything between that and how Boba Fett was portrayed in the Book of Boba Fett, running that area of Tatooine, running Jabba's old territories.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a very good comparison with him and Grief, because like you said, they very much mirror each other. And so what we have here is that there's been an announcement that they're actually going to put together a actual Mandalorian film that's actually going to have crossover connections between Boba Fett and Ahsoka all within the same film. So what does that really look like for Star Wars, right? Is this something that we want? Eric, I've kind of talked about it in times past about, different shows that we've watched, whether it's Law and Order or some of the superhero shows where you have heroes coming from their own individual shows and popping up into another character show. Green Arrow, with the show Arrow. You've had The Flash, all that. So now we're kind of doing it in Star Wars now, which is unprecedented. I mean, first of all, we're getting Star Wars series television, so that's already unprecedented in and of itself. Now we're actually taking it up a notch where we're trying to start to merge or dip into other shows where we're bringing these characters in. So, and we've often talked about it as well. If we're going to, let's just say, if we can borrow a page from Marvel for a bit, we could do like maybe a season or so of a couple of shows, and then do a movie where all those characters kind of come together in a movie, deal with whatever the situation, and then that sets up their respective seasons for their own respective shows. That could happen.
Yeah, well,
We don't
that's
know
the way.
exactly.
That's
We don't know exactly
honestly
where they're gonna go.
no, and that's honestly the way that I would probably go. I want to get to a couple of so Chad.
Ah,
I don't know, Chad, buddy. You're gonna have to help me out. He said Eric's 45th birthday. Oh, I think it was
he's
when
de-aging you.
Yeah, he's de-aging me.
Yeah, he's
It's too bad that I'm not turning 54 instead of 53 this year, because then you could have reversed those letters. Yeah, just in time. Yeah, that's right. Ahsoka does come out around my birthday, doesn't it?
It does.
What date was it that it comes out? Do you remember?
They didn't give a specific date.
They just
but
said August, right?
August. We celebrate the whole month, man. So.
And so Charlie says, see you on the CW show for a crossover for Star Wars mix-up for me. Thanks. I mean, and I see the point to where, yeah, because the CW network is really where you see a lot of these examples of
all the time
of the crossover stuff, right? I mean, that's more or less where you see a lot. And honestly, they could go either route, right? They could do the CW version of it. The Marvel version of it, I think, makes a little bit more sense in this context, though. Just because what you could do is you take each one of the standalone series and compare that to the standalone films in Marvel, and then you have like a common adventure, almost like their version of the Avengers, where you have maybe a plot that would cross over. Because that was one of the things that was always interesting to me, and a little bit where you had to do this whole suspension of disbelief thing. Because you have all these superheroes that are in New York City at any given time. Like,
but
virtually
they never run into each other.
And they never run into each other. And not only do they never run into each other, but when some, say like Iron Man or something is just dealing with some colossal crazy thing, it's like, and he barely solves the problem. It's like, wouldn't like about 40 other superheroes see this? And maybe
exactly.
go, hey, maybe I'll lend a hand.
Yeah, he could use the X-Men. He could use Superman. He could use, Superman is really more in Metropolis, which is like around Kansas. But yeah, I mean, but Superman, quite frankly, he can get there in like 2 seconds. I mean, yeah, you
right. Well, that's
this has got all over
Batman
the news
thing. I mean, in the latest DC stuff, right? They sort of alluded to the fact that Gotham and Metropolis are like across the river or something, So
yeah.
But even if you wanted to stick to just Marvel and DC, because it's true, Marvel and DC, like they're all in New York. But I mean, you think of every superhero, even in the Marvel universe, that's in New York. It's crazy. It's astounding.
Yeah.
So the thing that I do like about what Star Wars is doing, first of all, the universe is pretty big, right? It's not like all this stuff is happening in one city on one planet and everybody's jammed in there. So that formula, I think, would work even better because, and you've seen this a little bit between the Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, Mandalorian. You've actually already seen this on the flagship show, which is The Mandalorian, right? I mean, this is what honestly launched all these characters, not into the consciousness. I mean, yes, we did know who Boba Fett was already. That's obvious. But we are reintroduced to him post Return of the Jedi in The Mandalorian. And then they seeded that off into the Book of Boba Fett series. And then, of course, season 2, I think it was like episode 5 or something, that was when Ahsoka appeared. Again, Ahsoka's been around for a while, but this is the first time that we see her in this time period. And then now she's going to seed off into her own show. So The Mandalorian is very much like a flagship show. And by the way, since Chad did chat in, that was Chad.
I know.
Chatted in. I have to tell you, he started actually playing Jedi Survivor last night or yesterday, like yesterday morning. He spent like 7 hours.
Wow,
and he could barely
that's commitment
get through
right there.
Yeah, he could barely get through it, and he actually had to turn the difficulty level all the way down to like the easiest thing. And I can relate to that because I actually stopped playing Jedi Fallen Order. And again, incredible game. It was just ridiculously good. The graphics, the playability, everything was just mind-blowing. But the problem was, I got past, like, I think the first part or something, and then there was a part where you're climbing up all these different levels of some structure or building or something. I don't know. It's been a minute. And I couldn't get past it. And so I stopped. And I was hesitant to get Jedi Survivor for that reason. It was because I'm like, dude, I don't know, if I'm going to run into the same problem, and I don't want to drop like $70 on a game and then like I could barely do anything in it.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, kudos to Chad for, taking on the task. He's got to let us know, if he makes any more headway in it. I mean, and the games are cool. Like I said, they're a part of advancing the story as well within Star Wars.
Well,
just like the TV shows and
I bring that up.
The films.
Yes, because Filoni and Favreau are doing that. And part of this interview was he was talking about how, being that they grew up on all this stuff as kids, right? And you're left with Return of the Jedi, and then it doesn't pick up again for, another 30 years. That there's a lot that goes on. And there was a lot in the expanded universe. There was a lot in just like, even the canon stuff once Disney took over of things that happened immediately after Return of the Jedi that are fascinating. This is a really fascinating time period in which to base a lot of really good stories. And I think that they're playing around with this a little bit with the games. I mean, a lot of the games, of course, are going to the incredibly fertile ground of right between episode 3 and 4, to varying degrees. Some are a little closer to 3, some are a little closer to 4, but I think that, yes, the games are doing it, and by them actually wanting to expand this universe in such a way to where even though you have the individual standalone series, the fact that they're crossing over, because, see, this is the problem that I always had before. I always had a problem when Lucas was running it, and partially because unless he came up with it, he didn't even consider it canon or anything. So already that's going to be the root of any problem that you have with the series. But one of the things that irritated me, and this is true even to a little bit into Disney's reign with it, is that things were compartmentalized. And what you started to see over the last 5-10 years, well, maybe not quite 10, I mean, that was around when Disney actually bought it, but certainly 5, is that you've been seeing, particularly in the comic books, but now with these Disney Plus shows, a lot of crossover stuff. And you're seeing that a story that began in perhaps one property is now picking up in another one. Or maybe things are referenced, to where you start to think, okay, no matter what part of the universe or what time period in this universe they're actually trying to tell a story, you're actually seeing things being affected by other shows or other books or And now the books, the games, the comics, the movies, all that stuff, they're a lot more intertwined than they used to be. And I think that that was something that should have been done, quite frankly, even during Lucas's time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the continuity aspect of things makes things a whole lot easier for fans to follow, of course, and it makes it more interesting because now the world gets bigger, but also gets smaller, almost at the same time in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're expanding with new characters, but it also gets smaller because they all kind of intermingle with each other in a way. So, um,
Yes.
I think that this is really going to be an interesting move for Disney. This is going to be an interesting move for Star Wars because they're once again taking on something that hasn't been done in this franchise. And the question is, a lot of people are going to have is one, does this need to be done? Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the second part to that is like, how should it be done? And I'm applauding the fact right now that they're really trying to map out the story, which we all have, said till we're blue in the face. That's what's paramount. That's what's key is making sure you have a good story. We talked about on the last podcast how um, the Mandalorian is basically based on a man of a thousand faces, and that's kind of like the foundation of what the Mandalorian kind of is. But now you kind of have to take that concept and it's like, all right, now, and they've done a pretty great job so far.
Mm-hmm.
Even with season 3 being lackluster, as you pointed out, but still, it still feels like Star Wars, though. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Again, I
and
mean, I
that's
didn't
really
hate it. It
that's
just didn't live up
yeah,
to what it could have been. That's all.
1 and 2, yeah. And I think that's what's really going to be key is making sure it feels like a Star Wars movie. Don't make it too Marvel-ish with Marvel humor. And I know Marvel is still part of the Disney brand or whatnot, but you still have to keep it separate. Um, and I think that's what's really going to ultimately make fans, you know, really kind of go with this new direction.
Right. Well, I got to say, I mean, and this is a quote basically from Favreau's part of the interview. It says, as we are getting deeper and deeper into this, you start to have to really map things out, figure out what the story is, then have those characters fulfill what their growth cycle is and what their mythic hero's journey is. That's always
Hmm.
been Lucas's base. He's a student of Joseph Campbell, as we all know. How does it fit into the narrative that has been the hero's journey? And so, as we have more and more characters line up, you have to figure out how those characters are arcing and if it feels ultimately like a Star Wars story. And I think that this ties in to what you're
Hmm.
talking about because
Absolutely.
this is the key to the whole thing, right? You have to be able to expand things, but yet you also have the challenge of having it needing to feel like a Star Wars story and that it needs to be a continuation. And that's why I get a little bit critical sometimes when people say, okay, we got to get away from the Skywalker saga, all this other stuff. While I have in the past agreed with that assessment, actually, you
Hmm.
have to be careful how you do it because what Favreau is saying here is look, you have to introduce and bring all these new characters in. But at the same time, this is part of this hero's journey and how these characters are spawned off of that, how they relate to that in some way. And so I think that that's really the key. And of course, keeping that Campbell influence in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think because the problem is if you bring, let's just say, Ahsoka and Boba Fett into a Mandalorian, like, first of all, who's the movie going to be about? Number one,
Well,
is
yeah,
it a
it's true.
Mandalorian movie
Right. Yeah.
where
Who's the
he's the
actual
lead?
focus? Whose
Yeah, who's the
viewpoint, in
lead?
other words?
Exactly. And are is Boba Fett and Ahsoka assisting his journey, and they're just kind of helping out in certain moments, or are we trying to follow three different stories at one time? That becomes convoluted. And then now you have,
Unless,
then you have stuff where now you're gonna have the Batman problem where you have too many people and we can't really flesh out anyone's one story because you got too
Right.
much going on.
But that's only if they make the Batman mistake, because there is a way they could do this where it would make sense. It's the only way you could do this, actually. And then what I'm talking about is if you wanted to tell, 3 different stories, let's say, where
Hmm.
it's not necessarily everybody is involved in one stories. You would have to do it as an anthology. If you make it an anthology thing, and then you've seen this a million times in movies too, they'll have like 3 different stories, but maybe there's one common thread that runs through all 3 of them, even though they're 3 separate
Hmm.
stories. The VHS
Yep.
series, if you're into horror, is like a perfect example of that. But there's a lot of different movies from different genres of where they'll do an anthology like that. And that's the only way. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's the best way to approach it. I'm just saying that if you want to do it that way, that would be how you would have to do it. But this is a good segue into this actually, because they revealed essentially the synopsis of this film. They said, expanding upon Star Wars storytelling in the present, Dave Filoni will orchestrate the escalating war between the Imperial Remnant and the fledgling New Republic. Alongside producer Jon Favreau, they will bring together many of the threads of the Star Wars original series in a cinematic event. Now, that at first, that almost sounds like, well, these guys are really saying nothing, right? But actually, they're saying quite a bit. And this is especially true if you follow a lot of the books and the comics.
Hmm.
Because what they're doing is, and this has been established in The Mandalorian pretty firmly, and you see shades of it in the Book of Boba Fett. I'm sure it's going to take more of a front and center role in Ahsoka. But the whole war between the remnants and the New Republic, because that basically was the key to Thrawn's original trilogy when he wrote essentially episode 7, 8, and 9 back in 91 in the form of Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command. That was the big thing. That was what Thrawn was. Thrawn became the head of the Imperial remnants. The Empire wasn't unified, they were somewhat fragmented, but he basically had the biggest piece of the puzzle, and he had to work on getting some of the Imperials that ended up becoming warlords, essentially like a Jabba the Hutt or something, where they would have their own little, I don't know, platoon or company or, garrison or
Hmm.
whatever, and just rule some little territory. But then, of course, you also have the New Republic, who is trying to reestablish this official bigger government. And if you follow those novels, it basically ended in somewhat of a truce. It was like, okay, the Empire realized that, okay, the New Republic is the established, you know, government, I
Government,
guess.
baby.
Yeah, but what they did was they had this truce where it's like the New Republic basically gave the Empire some territory in the Outer Rim and said, all right, do whatever you want. And what was really cool was when the whole Yuuzhan Vong thing started to come up and the New Republic was falling and losing territory. For a while, the Empire stayed out of it. But then they started to become victimized by it. And of course, they always alluded to, there was great lines in there like, nah, Palpatine were still around. This wouldn't be happening, but, he would really show these guys or whatever, which would have been an interesting concept. But the point being that this has been something that has been the subject of a lot of expanded universe or stories, let's just say, beyond the films for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a very interesting concept because when you have two, um, so we've always kind of it as two different things. Like, so in the prequels, we kind of saw the Republic was the operating government, and then the original trilogy it was the Imperial regime, and they were the occupying force or the reigning government, and then now we're in this place where both are fractured, really.
Yeah.
And you're one is a little bit more ahead of the other because they kind of started to build as they were taking out the last regime. So they're a little bit more ahead. But you have people who were very grounded and who were very integral, that's the word I was looking for, in the actual operation of the former regime, still trying to hold on to stuff. So it makes for an interesting dynamic because not only just between the two parties kind of raging war against each other, but even with inside their own ranks, you got, Thrawn, you got, Gideon, you got Hux, you got everybody trying to create their own situation. And it's like, all right, well, how do we eventually come to some sort of consensus? And that alone, just like I said, like you said, a political thriller. That alone makes for an interesting concept. We even saw a little bit of that in Andor when we had Deidre and that whole, even that one little small faction of the ISB, like just watching them kind of stab each other in the back because everybody's trying to ascend to the next, to the next level. And, so it really does make for good storytelling if
Well,
you do it right.
here's what's interesting though, because at first I was going to count this as hey, let me correct you, but it really isn't a correction because what you're saying is essentially true. Now, when it was first proposed, it was kind of like the New Republic was definitely further along. They were more cemented in. It was just there were
Mm-hmm.
these remnants and these outliers basically that they had to try to extinguish, which is actually mirrored in this current canon
Mm-hmm.
because we haven't really seen a whole lot of the New Republic. The most that we saw was in the episode where they were on Coruscant. And I think that what they were trying to convey there was that within the core worlds and then even the mid-rim worlds, the New Republic has a firm foothold. They are the government. Nobody's questioning that. They are
Mm-hmm.
patrolling it. They have the power. They are
Yeah.
what they once were. But once you start to get into the outer rim worlds, that's where it's a little bit more of the Wild West. And I think that that's where, unfortunately, because that's really where the Mandalorian takes place, for the most
Mm-hmm.
part anyway, that's what we've seen the most of. So it sort of looks like the New Republic doesn't have quite as much of a foothold as they really do. We're just seeing an area where they're still struggling a little bit. But like you said, that's where all the good stories come from, right? I mean,
Right.
they're trying to get control of that, but they're in the meantime, they're fighting all these remnants of the Empire. And then, of course, you just have like, bounty hunters, pirates, smugglers, all these other guys that are crime lords, that are vying for their own powers. So, yeah, it's a really fertile playground, I think, for all of this.
Yeah. One of the things that I really do wonder is like, okay, see, I could see Thrawn being at the helm of a lot of the issues between our three heroes, Boba, Mando, Ahsoka. And I could see how in certain ways, like, Boba Fett might want to like, okay, he might not want the New Republic in there because he kind of wants to rule kind of like how he wants. Din is siding with the New Republic. He's saying that, like we saw in spoiler alert if you haven't seen the end of season 3, but he's kind of like, okay, I'll help you guys out on a case by case basis.
Mm-hmm.
So he's already kind of made his allegiance to the New Republic. Boba's kind of like, I want my own thing. How does that come in conflict when they don't get along? When Boba wants to do his thing and the New Republic wants to try to take over or take more control, and Din is in the way of that.
Well, here's
Then you,
what. Well, I mean, I think that this is something that I almost wish the movie would come out and then season 4 of The Mandalorian. And the reason why I say that is because now that Din is firmly in a more or less reunited Mandalorian group, things
Mm-hmm.
aren't the same as when we last saw Boba Fett, really.
True.
I mean, the Mandalorians have essentially reunited and taken Mandalore back.
Yep.
So there is that. How does Boba Fett fit into that? Does he want any part of that? Because, his whole thing was like, I don't really care. It's a wasteland. It's a waste of time or whatever. But, he does have, if he wants it, a brotherhood that can help him. And then at the same time, he does have that loyalty towards Din where they have kind of a special relationship. So I think that, in that sense, because I don't necessarily think that Boba Fett is against the New Republic per se. I think you're right, though. I think that the interest could definitely be, shall we say, confrontational?
Well, yeah, you got the New Republic trying to take over and trying to adopt more systems for that they are responsible for, and they will offer protection and help and things like that. But if Boba's like, no, we don't want it, I got this out here. What happens when there's a situation when it's more than what Boba can handle? Now, yeah, you make a great point. You have Mandalore now. And so now you have Bo-Katan, who's pretty much the leader of that. And I don't know where Mandalore falls. I don't know if that falls out of the jurisdiction of the New Republic, or is that still like an Outer Rim thing?
Well, that's why I say they almost have to. It's like they almost would have to make some sort of a movie, whatever it's going to be, right? Before they make season 4 of The Mandalorian. Now, of course, we don't know if they're going to deal with any. I mean, I doubt that they're going to spend a lot of time with this in Ahsoka, because I think Ahsoka is the other side of this, the Thrawn, the Ezra, the Jedi, that part of it, right? So it would be interesting if they actually had some sort of crossover movie or whatever that then was kind of like a platform by which the Book of Boba Fett then could maybe have a season 2, or perhaps Boba Fett is reincorporated into the Mandalorian, which honestly, that's really where Boba Fett, I think, was the best, when he was just a part of the Mandalorian series.
Yeah, I agree. I think, but bringing Ahsoka into the frame now, see, because you have ties there too, because now you have Ahsoka has worked with Bo-Katan, and then you also have
well, that's true. Yeah, that's right.
What's her face? Our graffiti artist. I can't think of her name. From Rebels.
Sabine.
Thank you. So you have Sabine, who's actually part of Mandalore as well. So now that you've so now that Bo-Katan's reunited Mandalore, Sabine now has allegiance to, or she has ties to Mandalore. You have Ahsoka, who has a good friendship with Bo-Katan. And so then now, what's going to be the overarching thing? What's going to be the threat to the New Republic? Of course, it's going to be Thrawn. Thrawn is basically trying to like you said, reunite the Imperials under his watch. So now that also brings Ahsoka into the fray, because she's still trying to find Ezra along with Sabine. So now we have, like I said, there's different ways that they could pull this off. I'm just really curious, of course.
So the X Factor obviously is going to be the Ahsoka series, right? We have to. That's a very important piece. I mean, right now, obviously it's all speculation until there's any, either an interview that's more specific comes out, or the movie itself comes out, whatever the case may be. But the point is, even the speculation is difficult right now, because there's a lot of unanswered questions that we need answers to from Ahsoka. not herself, but I mean the series.
Yeah, the series, right.
The series. So, I mean, we need to figure out where all this stuff fits. Now, there were some nice little
even
nuggets.
her, for that matter, honestly.
Well, yeah. But, I mean, we did get some nuggets, though, in Season 3 of The Mandalorian, when you had that whole meeting between Gideon, when he was kind of like, look, man, I haven't seen Thrawn. I don't even know what's going on. Because you had not... So, Armitage Hux is the Hux that we know of from, The Force Awakens and all that stuff. I always forget the name of Hux Sr. It's like the dad. But
Dad.
You basically had Daddy Hux. You had...
Daddy Hux.
But
it's like Daddy Warbucks from Annie.
Right? I know. That's exactly what it... As soon as I said it, that's what I thought of, too. But more interestingly is how they brought Pelion back into canon. Because in the novels that we've had so far, right, the new Thrawn trilogy that Zahn wrote, or this new canon or whatever, that actually flash back to Thrawn's days when he was found by the Empire, how he agreed to work with the Empire, he sort of rose to the ranks. Well, that was a guy by the name of Eli Vanto that was sort of like the Pelion surrogate, like the stand-in almost, like by proxy. And a lot of us who have been fans from the very beginning with these Thrawn novels assumed that, okay, he's just the new canon version of Pelion. And so he's going to be the guy that'll be Thrawn's right-hand man. Now, of course, when we last see him, he was almost part of this weird, like this Imperial exchange program with the Chiss. So Vanto has been pretty much stationed with the Chiss. And if you have read the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy that deals with Thrawn and the Chiss and all that, Vanto's there. It's really interesting stuff. It's great. I can't recommend it enough. I still have to read books 2 and 3, though. I'm very tempted to just get the Audible books and just get the audio books and just listen to them. But that said, it was key when they actually were like, no. He's not going to be a stand-in for Pelion because we're going to bring Pelion back in. So now Pelion is actually fulfilling the role that he filled in the original Zahn novels, where he's, with Thrawn rebuilding the Imperial remnants to be this new empire or whatever. So this is really, really fascinating stuff that we got on, I think that was like the second to last episode of Mandalorian Season 3. So now it really makes you wonder, because this interview basically says, we're going to focus on the war between the Imperial remnants and the New Republic. It's really going to be interesting to see how all these characters intersect.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a very cool time. And once again, I think we have 30 years between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, right?
Yep.
And so in this this is a 30-year sandbox that we really can explore a lot of different things. Like you said, I really do agree with you that the Ahsoka series is really going to be the X factor, because I feel like that's really going to kind of tie everything in, because you have Thrawn mentioned in The Mandalorian and he's coming. And so now we've already seen that, okay, he's going to be in the Ahsoka series. We already seen, him from the behind. And, we had to deal with the questions of Ezra. We had to figure out where was Ahsoka doing the whole original trilogy? Why didn't she help Luke? There's a lot of questions that her series has to answer, but then it's also pushing everything forward, as far as where are we going within Star Wars now? Because now you have Thrawn, who's like, the new ultimate bad guy. So if you're going to have the Mandalorian and Boba Fett kind of cross over into a film, Thrawn has to be at the forefront of this.
Yeah, well, here's a couple of things you got to look at too. So one, if you do that, where does it end? Does it end with the film? Because if it ends with the film, what do you do with Ahsoka season 2? Or, if you want to keep Thrawn as the bad guy, which would probably be a smart thing to do. And don't get me wrong, they could spin off multiple stories on this thing for years.
Mm-hmm.
You could get a lot of mileage out of Thrawn as the main villain, and you can also get a couple other, support villains. Man, I wish I could remember the guy. So the very first,
I don't think Thrawn's going away even after this movie though. If he's in this movie that's coming out, I don't think Thrawn's gonna go away for a while. Honestly,
no, he's not. And it's like you alluded to as well, where there's a lot of correlation actually between this little time period where the whole Mandoverse, as we're calling it, takes place, and then immediately after Revenge of the Sith, because those are actually the two, I would say, most interesting time periods to focus stories, right? Like, one of the things that I love about The Bad Batch, and I really wish that they would have more content, stuff that takes place immediately after Episode 3. To me, that is the most, or at least one of, the most interesting time periods that they still haven't really fully explored yet. And the same can be said for this. Sure, we got the sequel trilogy and all that, but really, sure, 30 years after, okay, what's everybody doing? But honestly, the most interesting is right after Return of the Jedi. What happens when the Empire is fallen, the New Republic is taking its place, but you still have some of the Empire guys that are trying to keep this whole thing alive. I mean, it's just rich with storytelling opportunities.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, hands down. I mean, that's why we're so excited about this, and this is why we decided I wanted to do this as a topic tonight, because season 3 of Mandalorian just wrapped up, and it's even funny because we, once again, spoiler alert, we've seen the demise of Gideon, but I don't know if he's really gone.
I was gonna say, man, I don't know. Well, first of all, let me just say, we're never gonna say spoiler alert because this whole show is a spoiler. I mean, that's just what we do. I mean, if you don't want spoilers,
I was doing it to be more facetious.
Well, yeah, and I mean, because I catch myself doing it too. Even I'll do it jokingly, like, if we're talking about the Phantom Menace or something, like, oh, spoiler alert, Maul died, or something like that. Like you said, more facetiously, but it is a good idea to get this out of the way because we do have new subscribers, and every once in a while people check it out. So I just want to be clear that our entire show thrives basically on spoilers. Yeah. I mean, unless we specify, like when we did the Rise of Skywalker review when it came out, we did do a non-spoiler. But yeah, I think that Gideon, honestly, is probably still alive. I mean, I don't necessarily think you have to go into Maul territory to make that happen.
No, not at all. It's very easy that he survived because he was in Mandalorian armor when he was in this whole battle.
Right. And it was somewhat of a powerful version of the Beskar armor too, if I remember correctly. Like
it's like almost like advanced it in some way.
Yeah.
The only thing is like his face, he might be burned up a little bit, so he might have to wear a mask now. But
I wish I can remember. Who was actually an interesting villain? See if you could look it up really quick. In Star Wars A New Dawn, which was the first Star Wars novel in the new canon once Disney took it over, it was like, the guy began with a V, like Mr. I don't remember now. But whoever that villain was, that guy was actually really cool. He was just a very interesting villain. He was a little bit different. He had a little bit of a General Grievous thing going on because he had some sort of armor and something like that.
Yeah, he had a weird thing like Mr. It was an odd name.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to look it up now because I'm really curious. So all you have to do is go Star Wars A New Dawn. Nothing like producing on the while we're live, right?
Well, this is how you has kind of fans we are. You know,
Well, but I mean, and that's the
we
other
want to
thing
make sure
too.
we give you.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, that's what this show is, right? It's like we're talking with a bunch of our friends. And that's basically Count Vidian. That was his name.
Count Vidian.
Count Vidian. Yeah, I'm trying to look for an image of him too. I'm not going to be able to put him up. I don't know if they actually ever drew him, to be honest. Oh, this is a depiction of him. But they could do a lot because back then you also had Ray Sloan, and Ray Sloan is another one who permeates the entire thread of Star Wars novels. And she was introduced in this as like Captain Sloan or something. And then she eventually becomes, I don't think she was ever a Grand Admiral, but she was an Admiral, I think, Admiral Ray Sloan. And she was an incredibly interesting character that would really, I think, enhance a lot of this story. I would not be surprised if she popped up in the Ahsoka series, to be honest. And if she doesn't, I think a Mandalorian movie, or at least a Mando universe movie, if it's not going to be focused on Din, would be an incredible addition. I think that if they put her in and maybe introduced her in that film, and then perhaps she can... Because the question is, say they do Ahsoka Season 1, and they leave it at that, right? So we have Ahsoka Season 1, we have Mandalorian Season 3, Book of Boba Fett Season 1, okay? And then they do a movie. The question becomes, I mean, do you do it at this point? And then the movie then kicks off Ahsoka Season 2, Book of Boba Fett Season 2, Mandalorian Season 4. You know what I mean? It's like, how do you, where do you put this film? Or do you do another season of the shows and then do a film after that?
Yeah, I think you have to have at some point like a juncture where like maybe everything kind of comes to either a end or it's right before you begin something, you know, then you start to do like, okay, you know, let's do a movie.
Well, I'll tell you this. They did say, I remember there was talk. I don't think it was in this interview, but there was actually talk that the movie would be what would end these series. So they would continue to do the series for however many seasons. Like, let's say they wanted to go 5 seasons of The Mandalorian and maybe 3 seasons of Ahsoka, and maybe they do a second Book of Boba Fett season or whatever. Once those were all complete, and they basically have said, okay, these are the last seasons of these shows, then the movie
meaning like
is
the series finale?
Yeah, like each one of them. Well, and that's the thing. The movie would actually serve as kind of like a common series finale. It would, like, each one of these seasons would be done, right? So you would have the last season of Mandalorian, say season 5. I don't know. It could end in 4. It could end in 7. Who knows? You know, say they decided season 3 of Ahsoka was going to be the last, and maybe they added another season of the Book of Boba Fett or something. Once those were complete, and it's like, okay, you know, we're done with all these shows, the movie then comes out and it caps them. It basically ties up the story. Very similar to how Marvel does the phases. But see, the question becomes, do you then say this movie is the end of phase 1, or is it just the end of the story?
Right. That's a valid point. I mean, yeah, like I said, there's a lot that we have to wait for. There's a lot of things we can speculate on, but so far, I mean, it seems like. Do you think this is a good move? Let's kind of.
Well, that's good that you brought that up because I put that in our description actually, and also when I was, you know, posting about this episode on social media, that was one of the questions that I posed to the audience on social media. I think it's a good question for you to pose to me and me to you, and then of course anybody that's watching that either wants to chat in while we're live or perhaps comment, you know, as they watch throughout the week or whatever. So the question becomes, do I think the movie is a good move? Okay. Yeah.
Like the concept of the crossover, like
The
all the characters
crossover
coming in.
film. Yeah, like a crossover film. I do think it's a good move because I think that while you could actually do a theatrical film on any of the shows, right? Like you can have a Mandalorian movie, an Ahsoka film, a Book of Boba Fett movie, or whatever. I mean, they were going to actually Boba Fett. That started out as a movie. It was supposed to be a film. So it was Obi-Wan for that matter. And then they ended up becoming, just like these limited series or whatever. But I mean, the point is, you could make a movie for each one of these shows. However, I do think it's smarter to do the shows and then cap it off with like this big theatrical crossover event. And it sort of puts like some punctuation at the end, right? Whether it's a period, question mark, or exclamation point, we don't know. Right? We don't know. Is it the end? Are they then going to just do another season of each of the shows? They could do that too. Maybe the whole Thrawn story converges into this film, and then maybe after that, there's a phase 2 for all this stuff. It's like you said, I mean, we don't really have enough information, and quite frankly, I don't know if they know yet. But yes, to answer the question a little bit more directly, I think it's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's good for Star Wars. I think it's good for them to definitely show how these characters interact because they were all within the same timeline. We've seen them already kind of more or less interact with each other at some point. Mando has interacted with both Boba and Ahsoka. So I think that them actually creating something like this will be uh, a monumental thing for Star Wars, and I would like to see like where the direction goes after that. Though, and like you said, is it more seasons? Is it another movie? Do we, where do we go from here? And then, like I said, we still have the film, and I'm sure we'll probably eventually cover this at some point. But the Daisy Ridley film where she's taking, on rebuilding the Jedi Order 15 years after the Rise of Skywalker. So that's still to come too. So they already kind of booked things, for December for 2024 and 27, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, as
I
far
think it's
as movie days.
25 and 7.
25 and 7? Okay.
Yeah, but I mean,
yes.
That's the thing too, because that's another good point. I mean, we're talking about this movie, they're talking about this movie, but where does that fit on the schedule? They've booked out their schedule, and I don't know. And of course, you could do more seasons. So yeah, we just honestly have to wait for more information when it comes to that stuff. But I definitely think that it's going to come sooner rather than later. I definitely think that. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting point actually, because I didn't even stop to think about the release schedule. Because like you said, the post Rise of Skywalker film with Daisy Ridley, where Rey is rebuilding the Jedi Order. And then don't forget too, you have that was it John Mangold?
The James Mangold film.
Yeah, the whole biblical Old Republic, how the Jedi first started epic. That's coming out. And then there's been other movies that, some of them were announced at Celebration. Don't forget, Kathleen Kennedy even said the Lando series is still on the table. So we don't know where that's coming in. So it's going to be interesting to see where all these projects start to fall into place. The one thing that I will say, and it goes along with the thing, and I'm sure I could speak for you on this one too, that while we do say this is a good idea, it's a good idea if they take the time and cultivate the story and the characters and all that other stuff, and make sure that when they do release it, it's really good and it's worthy of the Star Wars name. I think it's time.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100% on that one.
All right. Well, you still got about maybe 20 more seconds if you guys want to chat in, what your thoughts are on this whole Mandalorian film thing or building the Mandalorian universe. Certainly, if you're watching the rebroadcast of this, let us know in the chat, or not chat section, the comment section, what you guys think of the Mandalorian movie. Do you think it's a good idea? How do you think they should handle it? Do you think it's a good idea to have this Mandoverse thing going? Let us know what you guys are thinking. Or if you just want to comment in and suggest a topic for us to do, you can do that in any one of our shows. We read all the comments and we respond to as many of them as we can. So, yeah, this is, so let's say today's May 1st, right? Yeah. It's coming up May 4th.
Yes. Alcohol is on purchase already.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's on the Instacart.
A trip to the liquor store is what's in store, right? So yeah, May the 4th. May the 4th, Visions comes out. And in spite of Daryl's protestations, we've agreed to review it. But the thing is, do you think we should do that on Fridays or should we do that on Mondays? I mean, on one hand, we did do The Mandalorian on Fridays, and that would put it at because with Visions, we can almost do either or, because I think if they do it like they did last time, they're just going to drop the entire series. So even though we do a week-to-week thing, I think all the episodes might be available.
Right. I'm trying to figure out if I want to get it over quick or do I want to... Oh, man.
Yeah, somebody's got a case of the Mondays over here.
Yes.
Well, we'll figure it out. I mean, you guys will know, just watch and see what is posted for Friday and then what's posted for Monday, and then you'll know. But there's still a lot of Star Wars to cover. Chad had started something. So David chats in, "Hello, gentlemen. Happy birthday, Eric. It's not my birthday yet. I'm glad you were born. May God bless you with many more." Well, I appreciate that, David, but you're a little early.
4 months.
Yeah, actually, we're a little closer to Daryl's birthday than my birthday. My birthday's in August. My birthday's actually August 18th.
Yes.
So
mine is next week.
Yeah, Chad, and I wish I were 45, but I'm not. Chad was putting that in there because we made mention that Ahsoka was coming out in August. So, yeah, that should actually be a lot of fun. That is going to be a nice present. It's going to be cool to be able to start reviewing Ahsoka. I'm really looking forward to seeing that. So, yeah. We'll see you guys on Friday, 8 o'clock. Should be a lot of fun. We may be covering Visions, or we may hold that to Monday. You have to watch to find out. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.